Well, welcome and thank you for joining our conversation. So we're going to be talking about evaluating climate-smart agriculture products and the need for adjustment in the new climate reality. It is a mouthful, hence I turned around to read it. The first hour, we're going to have a panel. The second hour, we're going to have a bit more of an intimate discussion talking about what is happening in regards to the struggles within the food industry, within agriculture. So I wanted to start off with quick introductions, and then we'll get right into some questions. So I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, here as a co-CFO with Sultech. We are looking at a plant nutrient, and I will let Murray go through with it just to save time and to have a broader discussion.
Good morning. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite, Mark and Murray. My name is Tshepo Maeko. I'm an agronomist, originally from Africa, been working there for the longest times, at least for the better part of my 20 years experience as an agronomist, but currently I'm a manager of product development with the Saudi Arabian mining company.
I'm Steve Wilkinson. I am Director of Research at the University of Wollongong in Dubai. I am originally a geologist, but I teach on the civil engineering program as an engineering geologist.
Hi, I'm Murray MacKinnon, Southern Saskatchewan farm kid who went to Alberta to, go to the oil industry. Very lucky out of school to be involved in a lot of research projects, laboratory, ideas, try to commercialize them. Got involved in this project, which actually incubated at the old Alberta Research Council, now Alberta Innovates. My job was strictly to commercialize, finish off the lab work that the lab technicians had done. We got it to the point where we did start to commercialize the product, and was very soon to realize I was the only one that spoke farmer and knew how to start a tractor. So stayed with the project, which was something new and exciting for me to follow it all the way through and start working with agronomy across the prairies down in the United States, now into South America. And interesting enough, we started off as a soil amendment, plant nutrient, to very quickly realize that soil amendment, fixing the soils, correcting the soils was going to be even a bigger aspect of what we're doing. And in the last little while, we've been pulled in some new directions, which we'll definitely cover in the next hour.
So one of the exciting things was back in 2019 when I was talking about how energy intensive fertilizer is. People were like, "Oh, I don't really understand what that means." And then by 2021, everyone was like, "Mark, do you know how energy intensive fertilizer is?" It's like, yes, I was the one that was describing that. But it's interesting because we've heard multiple times how, we have to get rid of fossil fuels, but there's 6,000 products that come from oil and natural gas and derivatives off of that. And I want to turn over to Steve to go through, because he's doing research in terms of what is that going to look like in 2050 and how are we going to replace these? Can we replace these, and how is that market going to look?
Yeah, this was a research project that I started about 5 years ago, and we were looking at the fossil fuel transition and how many products we're going to have to replace and find ways to replace. This is huge. It goes all the way from glues to lubricants, to helium, sulfur, and it's sulfur that I've just started going into now as one of the key ones. It's a really tough transition when you look at the chemical basis for it, and so many things come from petroleum products, also byproducts of the petroleum industry, that as we start reducing the extraction of petroleum, we start having difficulties of where these products are going to come from. So the most recent project was helium, which has just closed. And this one is, again, a really important element. We can't get it from anywhere else. It comes out of natural gas wells, and it is used in MRI scanners. It's used, we know about balloons, but it's also used for a lot of cryogenics. Will be used as part of fusion power plants. It's used in nuclear power plants. It's used for the solar power plant here as part of the cooling cycle. So there's huge numbers of these elements. And shall I talk about sulfur? Yeah. So for sulfur, this has been used for a very long period of time. Before fossil fuels, it was extracted from sulfur mines and also from gypsum sources around the world, also from pyrite, which is iron sulfide sources around the world. As the fossil fuel industry grew and we started seeing consequences of acid rain, there was a drive to remove the sulfur dioxide from the emissions from burning fossil fuels. And that sulfur dioxide was turned into sulfur. And the sulfur has been used for a whole range of things. About 50% of it is used, it's used to make sulfuric acid. And about 50% of that sulfuric acid is used to make the phosphate fertilizers via a chemical reaction. So it's hugely important for that. In addition to that, it's also used for the manufacturing of copper, the manufacturing of zinc from the ores. So we will not have, or we would struggle to have access to copper wiring. We'd struggle to have access to zinc batteries if we didn't have these sulfur sources. And the reason that we're getting sulfur from fossil fuels is it's cheaper because it is a waste product. So as we move away from sulfur from fossil fuels, the price goes up because we have to go back to the previous older technologies. And that has a knock-on effect through all of these industries. If the price of fertilizer goes up, the price of food goes up. And so then we start seeing the difficulties in terms of achieving Sustainable Development Goals 1 and 2, no poverty and zero hunger, because the prices are going up. So these are the sorts of problems that I've been trying to get into and trying to pull apart, because it's so important to have these replacements in place so we don't deal with these what we call wicked problems, where doing one thing causes a negative effect.
And that's a great lead into what Murray is doing at Sultech in terms of trying to find ways to replace that sulfur that is being lost from the SO2. So I'll let him go through, what has changed, how things have changed. The running joke is agronomists older than the age of 50 don't talk about sulfur, where agronomists younger than the age of 50, that is a core piece because of that deficiencies that's only continued to grow. And then we'll turn to Tshepo, who has a fantastic view into the consumer and how he's seeing that demand for that sulfur kicker because of those shortages that we're seeing in the soil.
Thanks. It's been really interesting as far as what we started. We started to actually just make a better elemental sulfur product. Elemental sulfur has been used for hundreds of years in agriculture. We very quickly, through the research and testing, found out that we actually outperform synthetic sulfate products, which was great. I mean, we're 1/20th of the carbon footprint to make these products. We're better for the soil. So it was, then it was how big is the market? And we really didn't, again, we are more laboratory commercialization guys, not agronomists. As we got involved in agronomists, we did not realize how sulfur deficient our soils are. And a lot of people are like, well, we didn't, have, pre-industrial revolution, we didn't have a lot of sulfates falling from the sky as that range, but we've changed our cropping. If you, again, I'm going to talk Alberta, where we're from. You see the beautiful yellow fields. Crops that have a yellow seed or a yellow flower are very sulfur dependent. And we're growing more and more higher yielding crops to feed the world. That's our goal, everything from technique to, seed, farming processes. And so we're pulling more and more. And as it quits falling from the air, and I'm of the age that I was taught in school, acid rain was bad. It was evil. It was destroying our rivers and lakes. And it was. I mean, as a kid, Lake Erie was awful. Now Lake Erie is beautiful. But they didn't tell you the soil needed it. And as we've increased the yielding, Saskatchewan does a great thing. Every 3 years, they take all the soil reports that farmers do that are, trying to understand their land, and they print a summary, and it's been on a steady decline for 12 years. So as we've cleaned up the environment, Europe is way ahead of cleaning up the environment. And their 85% of their arable lands are actually sulfur deficient in Europe. So as they're trying to grow more and more crops, in Manitoba, for example, the yellow pea, a lot of it's being grown for the, the plant alternative meat products. The yellow pea is your binders, your protein source, consumes a ton of sulfur. You need that sulfur. So it's finding a ways to put in there. And we soon realized that synthetic sulfates have a ceiling. They're very, they have a salt index. They're not salty, but they have a salt index that cause a lot of osmotic pressure. And as we know, year to year, synthetic fertilizers are very tricky to use with your climate. As a kid, you would have 3 bad years out of 10 weather-wise for agriculture. As the world's changing, right now it's 5 and 5. You're getting 5 adverse years. When I say adverse, it could be wet or it could be dry versus a normal. And the agronomists now are actually teaching the farmers or convincing the farmers, don't fertilize, don't seed for the good year, seed for the bad year. If it is a good year, you will have a bump. You might lose some yield, but you're going to do better on the average. And the trend is going to be probably 3 out of 10 will be your good years in the next 10 to 15 years. So as farmers, they're like, what are the solutions in that? One of the other things with the sulfates and what the farming practices is, and it's not bad practices as we're learning, we're evolving, is definitely the soil health. Definitely the food shortages. Everybody's now looking at soil health, looking at sustainability. And is our soil better tomorrow than it was yesterday on a 2-year average? Like, this is where a lot of what we're being involved with is, how do we build up these levels in the soil, organic matter, the nutrients? Like, are we making our soils better? Are we on a steady decline? And this is where the trend is coming in a lot of growers. And we're seeing everything from, we have the Rocky Mountains made of lime. We see hard water. It starts to raise pHs, affects your nutrient uptake. We're seeing in the Pacific Northwest a lot of aquifer watering. And in this region of the world, it's a lot of aquifer watering, high in sodium. The sodium then is starting to build up. And we've all seen, alkali fields that have had too much sodium building up over time. So this is really an interesting aspect of something we're starting to get into, is correcting that problem, making the soil better. And I think as we start to need to feed the world, increase, arable lands, and that it's not just technique to get a higher yield of the crop. It's, let's make the soil better. Let's make it more reliable.
So that leads really well to our resident agronomist here, doing a lot in terms of, developments, getting feedback, trying to find ways to meet those needs. With Murray looking so closely at sulfur and what's happening, Tshepo has had the opportunity to look at multiple different pieces and trying to piece that together. So could you talk about how you've seen things change over the years and what your customers or what clients are really trying to pull forward and what you're seeing from a yield perspective?
Thanks, Mark. I think the basic starting point is farmers are business people. They need to make money. They work the land, the ecosystem, the environment. All of this is done in balance to ensure that they sustain their business. And their key business is to produce food. 7 billion breakfast meals have been served this morning, depending on which part of the world you are. In 2050, we'll need to serve 10 billion of those breakfasts, including lunches, including dinners. So the multiple effect of a need to farmer to perform, remains ever so significant. And the fact is, as much as issues of soil health, what sorts of nutrients the farmers need to use or to use, it's as old as farming itself. There's been evolution on the farm in terms of technology, understanding of the farmer's understanding of his resources, the land, the machinery, the sorts of nutrients that he needs to apply to the land. And as education progresses and evolve, so has the farmer's understanding of the interaction of those inputs. Why I'm saying so is we perhaps tend to often, in a given phase, in humanity, focus on the one aspect and overstepping the other. Murray just happened to mention of how he thought growing up acid rain was bad. Well, where I come from in South Africa, the one of the most prolific maize or corn growing regions, it's around the coal mines. It's around the areas where we process coal into electricity. Of course, then there's a big talk of we need to, cap down the use of coal and fossil fuels. However, on the contrary, in so doing, you're depriving the farmer of a cheap source of sulfur, and therefore yields decline. So there has to be a balance or better application of understanding of the science in how we develop some of the existing technology to ensure that they remain as environmentally friendly as possible. To ensure again sustainability of use of natural resources. I don't want to paint others as good or bad, but I rather focus on what is the latest innovation in ensuring that whatever that we know as good in the 60s that we now discovered 50 years later that actually is not as good as we thought. How do we transform such a natural resource or a byproduct from such a natural resource into something much more useful, and to ensure that we leave the planet a better place than we found it. Now, Mark, you asked me about what are the demand cycles like. Well, the common number out there is that 35% of soils in most crop producing areas are deficient in sulfur. Where is the most crop production taking place? Largely we look in Latin America, Brazil. You look at India. The same thing applies to soils in Africa. There isn't been much industrialization in most African countries. So you can actually say, and I guess that's why everybody's been buying carbon credits, right? Ensuring that the forests are kept well and. However, the locals, they need food. They need to work the land and produce food. As it stands, such soils will be deficient in sulfur, so hindering on the productivity on those lands. Most of those economies are pretty much, on average, 60% of the GDPs relies on primary agriculture. So to uplift those people from poverty, they have to work the land. They have to work the land in such a way that it becomes sustainable. So we owe it to ourselves to ensure that we develop solutions, products that can be used to ensure that, those regions that we know are going to feed us into 2050, are able to produce food, in a sustainable manner. Thanks.
Oh, great. So another key piece, marrying that and Murray talked about osmotic pressure. And I think it's important because some people may not know does that mean? How does that interact with the soil? And how does that really impact the synthetics and how we have to find ways to balance that? So I would love to ask Murray just to explain that a bit more and how that has been a problem and has to be addressed going forward.
So I'm going to try and keep this simple. And if I go down the rabbit hole, you're going to see Mark cross his arms, which means Murray stop, because I can definitely go down this rabbit hole a little too far. Osmotic pressure and synthetic fertilizers, we talk about a salt index, and some people think salt. It's not. It's a chemical structure. It's a crystal. To release the nutrients from synthetic fertilizer, you have to dissolve it in the soil. It has to dissolve with the moisture. And where you're having drought conditions that we are having, in many regions of the world on these off years, when you put synthetic fertilizer either in the seed row or sideband it actually will start absorbing the moisture out of the ground before the seed can germinate. It affects the germination of the seed. The seed definitely needs that moisture to germinate, and then once it gets through to the surface, then the sun can help with the energy. So we're really seeing now in these drought conditions, and and Tshepo talked about farming techniques. They're not putting all the fertilizer down at seeding anymore because of our dry soils or our dry climates. When you're having these, they're having to apply it at different times. So it's really quite critical when we talk about managing synthetic fertilizer. It's the great thing about elemental sulfur is it's, as it sits, as we ship it, as we recover it from the oil and gas industry, it's no good to the plants. I mean, we put it in the soil, the microbes and the bacteria ingest the sulfur. It's a food source for them. And they basically excrete SO2, and then that's up to Mother Nature, the soil, to what happens with the SO2. But so it's not causing any osmotic pressure, it's not causing any stress. It's actually working with the soil, it's working with the microbes, it's working with the soil, bacteria and that, and that's where you're seeing that benefit. So you're taking that synthetic component, that salt index, you're lowering it, which is just helping that critical moisture with the seeds.
So one of the common themes that we've had at COP28, that we've had at World Ag Tech, where we got to hang out with Tshepo and team, it was that everyone's all about technology. Technology is going to solve the world. It's like, okay, technology is a diagnostic tool. But it's not a solution. It can give you the tools to find a solution, but it's not creating the solution. So I'd like to turn to Steve and then Tshepo and then Murray to take that and say, okay, well, technology is great, but what are the tools? In your research, you're trying to find ways to replace what comes from the fossil fuel industry. But can you? There's technology that can help identify shortages, but you still need something to put down to have a corrective action. So, is it a statement that you agree with, disagree with, and if not, if so, why?
Just before I say that, just an interesting point on the agriculture around the coal mines, and that's something that's been happening for many years. You saw the agriculture is best around volcanoes in older times, which is why so many cities were destroyed by volcanoes, and the soils were so good, so they still lived there, even though it was dangerous. So for technology, technology can help, mostly in developed countries. The high-tech solutions are being progressed, and we are getting a lot of that at the moment. Here in the UAE, we have something like there's the Food Tech Challenge. There's lots and lots of high-tech funds which are available to support agriculture. We just had a slightly different fund that's been released, which is a regenerative agriculture funding, which was unusual in that it was looking for low-tech solutions and early stage solutions, because that's a gap in terms of research funding. I think that as we move towards 2050, we're going to need a balance between high and low tech. There will be countries where high tech is going to work, and there will be countries where we need more low tech solutions just because of the time that it takes. Looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, many of them are looking at technology transfer and complaining that that is not happening fast enough. That's one of the red areas in most of the Sustainable Development Goals, that we're not getting that technology transfer. So that's why I think that there is going to be some relatively simple approaches that are going to be quite successful. That wasn't quite the question that you asked me.
Perfect. That was perfect.
Okay.
As you're speaking about the technology and evolution and the low techs and high techs, it just triggers in my mind that, if we go back in time, and I wonder how many people pay attention to this, people now commonly know the formula for the speed of light, E equals mc squared. And I sit here and wonder how many people know about the Haber-Bosch process. The 7 billion of us today owe our existence to the Haber-Bosch process. This was a discovery that defined how we turn natural resource into mineral fertilizer. And in the circles today at COP28, you mentioned the word mineral fertilizer. You tend to become, an enemy of the state in some way, But bottom line is, it's the innovation that was discovered back then that brought us to where we are in terms of population, growth as humanity. The question is, what is the next best thing? You talk about, the time we spend at the World Agri-Tech, and I love to attend to the World Agri-Tech because there's lots of smarter people than me, that bring lots of innovations, and it's just good to see how the science world, is evolving, and lately how it's coming together with technology, But the question is, and there's so many smart kids out there that are coming with, either harnessing of bacteria, biologicals as it may be, and I think personally I'm following that journey so that I can empower my knowledge to understand where the next big thing is going to be, and the next big thing is, in my head, is it's going to be a combination of mineral fertilizers used with some of these advanced, byproducts of either fossil fuel or even new discoveries for that matter, to address one thing and one thing only: nutrient use efficiency. When we apply that, granular fertilizer, or we spray that, a liter of liquid fertilizer into a crop field, are we getting the maximum benefit out of it? Are we ensuring that it's going to be utilized by the crop to transform it into protein, into nutrients that feed us? If we do that more, I'm happy, Mark. We'll still spend time together at Agritech.
Good.
Other than that, I'll sit in my office or spend time in the desert farms looking at date palms and things like that.
It's been interesting, like I say, oil and gas guy till 7 years ago. And when I started going to the ag conferences, going to the great schools like ag schools and that we have in Western Canada and the United States, it was really tech. It was very tech driven 5 years ago. Satellite imaging, drones, soil monitors, water monitors, devices going on the seeder, the tractor, the harrows. I mean, and TELUS, was going to capture all this data marketing, and they did a great job. They sponsored Olds. There's a TELUS center there. And it was interesting. About 2 years ago, they started saying, we have got so much data. And what do we do with it? And then the farmer's like, look, I know I've got a hill that's got caliche soils. I can't grow anything. Your satellite image confirmed that. Your drone confirmed it. Your soil samples confirmed it. But like my yield monitor confirmed it. What are we doing about it? And you're really seeing U of S, U of A in Edmonton, Olds College. They've now all started soil health groups, sustainability groups with the soil. And they're doing this. Okay, now we need a toolbox. And it's funny, our sulfur, I always tell this to Mark, I said, we're a saw. We're a great saw. We're the best saw in the world, but you need a toolbox of tools. And if you're trying to fix wires, you don't need a saw. So I'm not that fix, although there's no one product, whether, some people might try to promote as we're the magic pill. In agriculture, there's not. And the young agronomists that are coming up, the young soil scientists, they're really looking at like, what is my toolbox? What have I got? And then what tools do I use to help with the farmers in that? And I think, being a low tech, I used to hate drones because you'd go to a tech show and there'd be 7 booths with drones in them and satellite images, 7 different companies all buying imaging and then diagnostic of this. Now you see only 1 or 2 drones, and you're seeing people that are working like, okay, here's what we're doing, and we're fixing this part of the pie. We have a whole pie, but this is your part. And I'm excited for the next couple of years to see our young people coming out of school that are actually sitting there going, okay, I've got this great toolbox of tools, and I'm going to use these 3 tools, or I'm going to use these 2 tools, or I'm going to use these 2 for 5 years. Like we're doing some stuff with the Brigham Young University. And, farmers, most people, we're all of the technology age. Everybody wants that instant solution, the magic pill. And, it's interesting. Dr. Brian Hopkins is saying stuff like, this is a 5 to 7 year program to fix 60 years of your farming practice. Now, they weren't bad practices. They were current. They were valid. They've evolved every 10 to 15 years. We're always getting better. Nobody's going backwards. But it's interesting when he sits down and says, we can start to fix your problem of 60 years of farming practices, but it's a 7-year program. It's not a magic pill. And I think that's where people, really have that, this mindset, we always want that magic pill.
I think that brings up a great point, because in the developed world, you keep hearing from a governmental level, they keep saying it's like, well, you have to reduce your nitrogen. And the farmer's like, okay, great. With what product? And we're like, we don't know, but you just have to do it. So when you look at the next iteration in the developed world in terms of trying to change those farming practices, but then when you look in some of the developing world, where people are very customary, where people may not be able to read and they don't understand the complexities with nitrogen, urea, ammonia. If you put down too much, you're burning something, or you're hurting the root system, and then you're going to struggle. So I want to turn to Tshepo for a moment and see, it's like, you're interacting with some of these other areas that if we really want to be serious about feeding the world, about addressing the food insecurity, what comes next? Like, what is the next iteration in both the developed world, but also the developing world, to get them to change those practices and the products that are out there?
Mark, it will always be a balance of appreciating what the developing world needs to go through to catch up in terms of obviously meeting their, at least moving towards, achieving some sensible targets towards the SDGs, in terms of lifting people from poverty. And that start with appreciation that they need to work that land and they need to work it smart. We need to drive education. Most of the fertilizer companies, agro input suppliers does a great deal of job in terms of extension services, which most of these governments, seems to lack, and they even step up in terms of putting, research. I've heard a common number. Most of these governments spend less than 1% in specifically agricultural R&D, and that expense is now shifted into private organizations. It's kind of become a difficult place because private entities are there for to create shareholder value and I don't want to say profit maximization, but bottom line, it's if they don't make money, they won't be sustainable, and therefore private companies having to make room for R&D budgets become a difficult request. However they try, and this has been the biggest source of innovation into most of those farms. I'd like to pick, like, for instance, Kenya. For instance, 30 years ago, Kenya wasn't a big boy in agriculture, in exports, but look how they moved into effectively, becoming one of the dominant players into flour exports. Where does that come from? It came from private organizations as well as government finding common ground to develop, agronomic skills and investment into developing that sector. One of the biggest, foreign direct, earners, it's now tea and flowers. So we need to look at such approaches. What is the country's best capability in terms of production of food, and how do we then move together? Obviously with mutual interest with private organizations. So it's education, Mark. It's technology. Whether it be low or high, we need to look at what can be adapted to such a country, and practice it as such and drive it as such. It will be naive of us to want to move a country from, say, no, you gotta stop, to your point, stop using nitrogen. But the question is, what do I replace my nitrogen with? Nitrogen is a building block of protein. It's a primary building block of protein into crops. So if you take out nitrogen fertilization in the current form, what are you going to replace nitrogen with? So we need to answer those in a progressive way, trying to find hybrids. I for one love the outdoors. I love a sense of fresh air. I want to go to the stream when I'm in the village, walk barefoot and just immerse my feet into the water. I get the balance between me and nature, that we are one. So I wouldn't want to pollute the streams of water, or the lakes into the farming areas. So that's where we appreciate and want to engage ever so often with, tech expert. How do we ensure that every single, granular fertilizer that is applied, or of chemical spray for that matter, doesn't go to damage the environment. The other one thing is, how do we answer, I guess, the call for the need for these developing economies to achieve, say, food security, as well as the balance of having to move justly away from the use of fossil fuels. And this, I think, for me, it remains a debate, and it cannot be answered from just an agronomics only. We can only play our part to support, educate, look at what tech we can, bring into the farming systems. Again, teach them, train them how to use it, and so forth. You mentioned the word agri-tech, earlier on. People are talking about how do we then move AI into farming? I'm like, hang on. Where I've worked in northern Ghana, an area called Tamale, you can't be talking about AI. It's just too far-fetched. The guys still have to have access to a bag of fertilizer. Oh, by the way, when they harvest the grain, they still have to get that grain into a proper storage facility. Otherwise it still goes to a waste because they've got no silos. So the building blocks that they need in some of these markets, it's as basic as what people have seen 50 years ago. So we need to strike that balance and appreciate that, no one size fits all approach will work. However, with the reach that we have, through communications technology, and for that matter, educational, institutions, we need to take, what is being learned in the developed world, that works, that doesn't work, and move it down into the developing, countries, and adapt it to their understanding, and so hopefully we achieve, I guess, balance in terms of ensuring that we are still be able to feed ourselves and live in clean environments.
No, that was great insights, and that's where I want to turn to Steve again, because when we, being in the UAE is at the crossroads of the world. There's a big melting pot of individuals that come here for education, to learn, and there's a lot of investment happening. But at the same time, they're also getting a bit more realistic of, well, why are we replacing fossil fuels? Let's decarbonize. We're in the decarbonization side. So when you look at the people that are coming through that are trying to get educated, what are you seeing in terms of the biggest ask from people coming to the UAE to get that education? And is it really the right way to do it of, well, let's use the trillions of dollars of infrastructure that's currently built. Let's decarbonize it because we have some of the new technologies, and be smarter about how we're using things over time.
Yeah, I think I got that. Yeah, the UAE is a melting pot of cultures. There's so many different people at the universities. I think we are a truly international campus. We've got about 4,500, I think, students on campus at the moment. Most countries across the world is covered. Many are students are here because their parents are here. Working in various industries, but we also get students who see Dubai as an opportunity. It is a place where if you want to do something, you can bring it here and you can make a success of it. There is so much investment in good ideas, and that is what Dubai does very well. It supports businesses to make them successful here, and then it exports that across the world. It's really good at that. Now, what was the second half of what you were asking?
People coming here to learn and to try to take that back to their local countries.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a big advantage of the region, because we've got lots of international campuses here, lots of universities from across the world. We bring in ideas. This is again a melting pot of ideas, where you can find the things that work and then take them elsewhere. In terms of agriculture, the UAE is interesting. There are two schools here for agriculture because it's a difficult place for agriculture. We've got the vast hydroponic farms, which are completely enclosed environment, ignoring soils and all of that. And they are vertical in liquids with crops grown in sponges. That's to generate large volumes of quite specific products that it works. And then there are the open field farms. We have got them mainly towards the edge of the mountains where the aquifer is quite deep, because as the extraction from the aquifer has been going on, it's been moving towards the mountains in the deeper areas of the aquifer as our groundwater is gradually depleting. And that's why we've been having cloud seeding and water from air systems to try and replenish that aquifer so that agriculture can continue within the UAE. Open farm agriculture can continue. It is very challenging because most of these farms have got quite poor soils. It's a desert, really. Some of them are even importing soils so that are able to grow within the desert environment. There are issues of quite saline waters in some of the marginal areas. So they're extracting these saline, this saline water and at some point the soils become too saline and the farm just becomes not profitable anymore. It closes. The borehole that is there is shut down, and the farms are moving closer and closer to the mountains with time. So it's an interesting dichotomy of environments because of the two different agricultural systems.
So I think that brings up a great point in terms of, especially here, we've heard a lot about vertical farming, about greenhouses, and some of the complexities that go into that. And Murray, I turn to you in terms of, how is that going to change the fertilizer needs? Are we going to need less of it, more of it? How is that going to evolve over time? And is it something that can really answer some of that call going forward?
It's interesting. Again, we all read the papers the last few years with the conflict in the Ukraine, fertilizer shortages, which there's been a lot of groups working on alternatives, eco-friendly, environmentally friendly. I will use the word organic, but not necessarily organic. I mean, and what I'm seeing is how fertilizers are being used. I had mentioned before, they're maybe not putting it all down at seeding time. They're applying it at foliar time. They're applying at yield production time. So I'm definitely seeing a reduction in fertilizers. I mean, in at least in North America, we talk a lot about the nitrous oxide emissions from nitrogen. But if you look around the world, Brazil, Argentina, Australia, where they have massive amounts of rain, sandy soils, they actually worry more about groundwater emissions. Tshepo had talked about walking in the creek. So for example, in Australia right now, the Great Barrier Reef is now a UNESCO site. And the Gold Coast is a massive, massive agricultural area, a lot of sugarcane and that. Again, it's how do we protect the Great Barrier Reef from runoff emissions? And again, this isn't nitrogen. There is parts of nitrogen, but it's the other fertilizers, the other products we're doing. So I definitely see there's been a lot of studies done with the universities. And again, Tshepo talked about the actual fertilizer companies, switching to, how to make it better, how to be better stewards. 10, 15 years ago, most research in that universities were doing stuff on fertilizers or seed or, crop protection, because they had this mindset that the land was like the farmer's tractor. If the farmer doesn't change his oil, change his air filter, and his tractor wears out earlier and it, breaks down, well, that's the farmer's fault. You didn't take care of it. And the land almost fell into that same mindset. That's your land. That's your asset. You need to take care of that. That's your responsibility. But there wasn't a lot of tools and education to help the farmers that way. And I definitely think you're seeing way more now with the big fertilizer companies, the synthetic fertilizer companies. Yes, they want to sell product, but they're also saying, hey, I make a great product, but it's even better if you use it like this, or you do this with it. And I mean, I think Tshepo would probably talk about this a lot more. 20 years ago, the big fertilizer companies, they're not going to say names or anything like that, maybe only had 1 or 2 nitrogen products or 1 or 2 phos products. You now look, they have 20 products, and there's the right product for the right time at the right rate, and I think that's where you're seeing a reduction or a better effective use of it. I'm probably Tshepo, you can probably talk to this way better than I am.
That's true, Mary. We've seen, a shift in application of science on the farms, and that remains. And I think to that effect, that's why I guess you and I are sitting here together. That's, my coming into contact with micronized sulfur. I said, hang on, what is this? I've always been exposed to sulfate sulfur, from the current sources, which is ammonium sulfate. We've been talking about the need for increased sulfur percentage, in NPK products or NPS products. This is a combination of nitrogen, phosphates, and potash. The S becomes that micro essential that's ever so became important in the last 30 years, since the discovery of NPKs. So everybody's talking about how do I ensure that I've got increased sulfur in my NPK, NPS, and the reason for that is sulfur in its crop available form. It's an enabler for root crops to take more nitrogen. Nitrogen on its own becomes actually almost ineffective, because at a point of application, you're likely to lose 30 to 40% of the N you applied, more so under dryland farming conditions, as compared to irrigated crops. Now, most of the food crops that we eat in the world, corn, rice, soybeans, who else? Well, most of the field crops are largely grown under rain-fed conditions. So what it means is, at a point in time, a farmer applies the fertilizers and hope it rains in time, and then hopefully then the nutrients are still available for crop uptake. So we need this additional micro essentials. It be sulfur, it be zinc, to ensure that the nutrients remain locked in an available state, not absorbed to the soil colloids to a point that becomes unavailable and becomes useless. And it's one of the biggest debates in Brazil. For many, many years, Brazilian farmers have oversupplied the P, the phosphate in the soil, with the notion that it remains trapped in the reserves in the soil. Yes, it remains trapped, but it's not an available reserve. You need to apply an additional micronutrients or microessential to trigger the chemistry in the soil to ensure that the trapped P becomes released for crop uptake. And this is where we tend to step out of our comfort zone as agronomists, Mark, to speak to the likes of Murray and them. Say, hey, hang on, guys. What is this micronized sulfur? What does it do in the soil? So and to your point, again, the right soils at the right time, at the right rate, just enforces that education again. Why do we do that? Because we need to, attain nutrient use efficiency. Here in the desert, water is of paramount importance. You spoke about all the vertical farms, hydroponics, and everything else. Well, the concept has been there. My first pot trial was in an hydroponic setup, at university. So this for many, many years has been science that applies to academics and all these things. But this part of the world, it becomes everything else, because that's just one of the best sources of growing fresh produce. And what does it need? It still needs nitrogen, phosphates, potash, sulfur, zincs, and all these things. Now, how are you going to apply those, products at the right, time from the right source? Again, drives the need for specialty products. So you're no longer going to be applying the same old bag of fertilizer. It might have to come up in a can, in a bottle, in a liter or something like that. So the need to develop such specialized technology to give us specialty products, becomes even more paramount. Because you've got all these automated systems, that you can feed nutrients through either the irrigation system, or I've seen some fence systems that use infrared and all these things. All of this to harness that now, how do I put it? The environment that's been created to ensure that we get the right sort of food production going on.
So I think that brings up and rounds out a great summary of what we're talking about. And we're not here to debate, climate science and if we're climate change, who's driving it. But there is a new climate reality. Murray talked about how we're seeing more and more bad years in terms of wet and dry. Steve talked about your farms moving. Tshepo talked about the need to adjust the way you're bringing fertilizer, the crops that are happening. As we look forward over the next 20 years, are we going to see, or can farms really move? How are we going to see seeds, different growing regions adjust what they're growing to try to meet the new climate shift? And what kind of sources are out there to help address that? And I'll start with Murray and work backwards.
Thanks. I'm gonna say, where you have bigger farms like we have in North America, Brazil, there is a lot of agronomy, a lot of resources that are working with, you know, the bigger farms and that. And I'm going to say this technology, a lot of people have the small farms actually do work on the bigger farms at the peak time, seeding, harvest. So they see that they're bringing that technology back. Where you have a lot of regions of smaller farms, developing countries, and that I think this is where we're going to see the big change. We were just in London and we were talking with Lipton, and it was interesting. I knew nothing about tea. I love tea, but I knew nothing about that. It's basically a bonsai. You know, a tea tree can actually grow, you know, 12 feet tall, but they bonsai them, they're harvest, and tea trees can last 40 years. You know, it's taken care of. So these are small family, for lack of a better term, orchard that, you know, our grandfather first, you know, planted this tree and bonsai'd it, you know, and we were harvesting it. And it's interesting, they've been doing the same thing for so many years. And, you know, sulfur's not mobile in the plant, like even though the lower leaves did have good sulfur, as the environment cleans up, you know, Lipton's trying to find a way, how do we work with these growers to get a better quality tea, increase the bricks content, you know, its products and that. And really what they're starting to do is they're saying, let's add some of these other micronutrients into the product they're already buying, the nitrogen, the phos, you know, the potash. And it's not that they're sneaking it in there. It's like, let's just build it in there because we know they need it. But trying to educate them how to use it has just been a huge challenge.
So let me just look at an older geological example. If we look at the glacials and interglacials during the last ice age, you can track those by looking at pollens within lakes. So we can drill down into a lake bed and look at the different layers. We boil them up in normally bicarbonate of soda and then put that through a sieve. And then we can look under the microscope at the pollens within that. And you see with glacials and interglacials, the ice coming forward and retreating, the change in the species around that lake, the change in the pollen that we get within those lake soils. We are also seeing that now with climate change and some species moving mostly northwards. So within the oceans, as the environments are quite fine, fish species are moving northwards at some rate, and fish farms have been moving a large distance along the coast of North America as one of the key studies in that area. Now, for agricultural products, we don't really have that so much. It's difficult to adapt in the way that natural species adapt by moving northwards. You'd need to alter the crops that you're planting, and the crops that you're planting, as I'm going outside of my field with people who are experts here. The crops that you're planting are driven by market, as well as driven by climate, as well as driven by the location. I'm not sure how much is driven by the climatic conditions as they change, and I'm hoping that you can pick me up on that. But the natural system would be that species move northwards or move up mountains so that they can maintain their environment. And within our agricultural systems, I believe that is a little bit more challenging.
Thanks, Stephen. Humanity, it's a smart species, and that's why we're still here. You know, since time immemorial, we've learned to adapt. You know, and the same. I guess logic applies to farmers. I'm very passionate about farming. You know, if there's ever people that are very hardy and committed to their business are farmers, you know, especially in those developing countries, and the same will apply in the developed world as well. You know, you often get guys that come from farming families 3, 4, 5 generations down the line. You know, it tells you how it becomes just a family thing. But the point I want to make is, for us to remain adaptive, we're gonna have to learn, you know, maybe unlearn the old ways, relearn the new ways, you know, which takes me to a discussion I had with my boss, you know, earlier on in the week, after a meeting we held with one of the European universities, one of the best universities, I must say, in agriculture in Europe. And he said, Tshepo, well, look, I saw this boy is studying biology. I'm like, well, and he said, how do we get him to study agronomy? I'm like, well, it's simple. We tell him we're going to convert him to study, soil microbiology. He said, hang on, can you do that? I'm like, yes. We get him to study microbiology, get him to study soil biology, that give us a different asset altogether in the work environment. It brings out somebody else that can think from a different side of biology of the science that also applies into agriculture. And he looked at me and said, are you for real? I'm like, yes. Get him to sit down with me, we'll talk him through. It's just a switch off a few subjects here and there, and then we have a different assets. This talks to how the world of agriculture has come at the convolution of multiple disciplines. You don't just need a guy like me that learned how to plant corn, irrigate it, and harvest it. You need the smart kids that can bring in gadgets that can sense the amount of nitrogen in the leaves. That you can put this gadget on the soil surface, and it can give you the measurement of multiple nutrients in a square meter, or whatever the unit surface area. You need those guys to sit in one room ever so often to give us multiple solutions to the problems we face on a daily basis. The one area I always skeptical touch about is on the policy side. Most of these developing worlds are still using X products because that's what government makes available. That's what is on the subsidy scheme. The farmers in Mozambique are using X product of fertilizers because that's what the government buys on the tender. Are these sort of mechanisms of buying inputs in agriculture helping the need for us to educate farmers? In most instances, doesn't. It could be a solution to addressing the route to purchasing of the inputs, but doesn't address the issues of its practical applicability in the field. So the farmers end up making do with what they have, or having to buy whatever they can easily afford because it comes on a subsidy scheme. So we need to really look into the policy and at least formulate the policy from a science-based, basis in terms of how we address some of the challenges. Thanks, Mark.
So, Tshepo, you brought up an interesting point we're going to talk about later here, but U of A started doing a lot of research on nitrous oxide emissions, and they found this anomaly that when they used elemental sulfur, not sulfate, nitrogen or sulfate fertilizers, there was a reduction in the nitrous oxide emissions. And the Canadian government was very excited about this. They've offered them, like, I think it's $2.5 million for a 5-year research project. Interesting enough, when they're writing up, anybody who's done research, you have to write up a scope. They can't explain the why. They can prove the how. They can repeat that they have this result. And so it's now gone from agronomists and soil scientists to microbiologists. So they've now the U of A, it's now gone from the agronomy and the soil science group. It's over at the microbiology group now. And they're saying, you have to tell us why this is happening, how this is happening, and we'll give you the money. The money's sitting in the queue, but you need to at least have the science behind it. And it's funny, it's not agronomy, it's not the soil group, it's the microbiologists now that are holding that ball to say, we've done this 10 times over. Every time we have the same result, we can show a reduction, but it's like, we need to understand the science. So it's interesting now, the group that we were working with, now we're sending sulfur to a totally different group that look at stuff totally different. And we're learning a new language working with the microbiologists, but they're the ones that are right now going to crack why this happens. We can make it happen. We can repeat it happening. Nobody can tell you why. And as we all know in science and research, unless you know the why, you're kind of spinning your wheels.
So one last question before closing remarks. The one thing that, and Marie brought up the Brix content, and there's a lot of ways to measure yield, and Brix is measuring the caloric value, the sugar within it. So even though you may look at a field and say, hey, there's a ton of yield out there, then all of a sudden you look at the internals and you realize that the yield isn't all that great from the oils and from the quality of what's out there. And we're seeing with these growing soil deficiencies that the yield or the quality of the yield is diminishing considerably. So I'd like to turn to the panel and give and hear from each perspective in terms of how can we address not only just, okay, well, I have big plants, but how do I worry about what's inside that plant and trying to pull the most out and put the most caloric value and really repair some of the lost qualities?
Thanks, Mark. It's interesting in the last again, I'm going to say COVID, talking about nutrient density of food, quality of food, the nutritional value of food. And I'm going to even go as far as to the transport of food. Tesco in London was really doing a whole thing about not just how do we package it, get it like Tshepo talked about in a silo. They're talking fresh fruits and vegetables. How do we get more to the shelf that looks good that people are going to want to buy it in that? And it all goes right back to the soil you're growing in it, the practice you're growing in that actually helps with the shipping, helps with the shelf life, helps with everything. So definitely, I think that that's where it's baby steps, and there's a lot of them. And I think that's where we're starting to see this. How do we get that nutrient density up? How do we get a better food? There's been great research as far as, a funny one was on the milling properties of wheat. I mean, farmers are paid by how much wheat they grow in a field, not how good is the wheat. And University of Manitoba and Manitoba Ag did a research on milling properties of wheat, growing with different, how it, different soils are growing, and even the rise. And it's amazing. 20% different in rise, different in milling properties, less waste at the mill with what is rejected. And it's again right back to where the soil starts and the farmer starts.
Thank you. I want to pick up on what you said before on the nitrogen dioxide. That is fascinating. The reduction in nitrogen dioxide is one of the tricky greenhouse gases. So if that can be reduced, that's a really, really good thing for this product. I also wanted to talk briefly about this idea of quality and quantity, which it's problematic across lots of industries. Even in research, researchers are now driven by altimetrics because they're things that you can measure. So a researcher is measured on number of publications, how many citations have gone onto that publication. And that's problematic because it drives trends. So if we take researching agriculture, I can get more publications if I do computational models, or if I do something quick and easy, get the publication, and then my numbers go up and then I can get my promotion. This is across lots of different fields. Whereas if you do lab work, you're slightly slower than a computational model, so you'll get fewer publications. And field work, which is really critical in agriculture, you will get the fewest publications of all because there's a lot of energy and time intensity in that. So I think that we do need more of a move across lots of different fields away from quantity and towards quality. And I like what you were saying about the quantity of wheat and the quality of wheat earlier. That really is something that we need to move towards, more quality.
Thanks, Stephen. That was a very good question, Mark, about quantity versus quality. Commercial farming, driven by quantity. You're looking for quality, grow it locally. Grow it locally, grow it at a small scale. It's quite funny, I look at the gentlemen around me. I haven't been around longer than they've been, but I grew up in a community where people planted vegetables, at the backyard. People kept chickens. People kept basic, of domesticated animals for own consumption in use, and that equals to quality. I think one of the cultures of locally grown vegetables and maybe kept chickens and eggs is that it teaches kids, the people, about food production. The interaction of us as humans and the land that we live on and what it means in terms of food production. It's something I'm trying to teach my kids now. I've got 16, 11, 9 years old, so that they appreciate and understand what food production is in earnest, and start to formulate opinions about, they hear these things at school about, global warming, climate change. What does it mean in earnest? So I always, tell people when I'm sitting around, at home, that just a small patch, equals to quality. There will be need for commercial, food production, big scale farms and all these things. But, if there's one thing I've learned in COVID, and, most people used to phone me up, do you still have your spinach? Would you still have your cabbage? I'm like, yes. I do this for fun in my case. So locally grown equals to good quality. You can measure, monitor, and see it over the time. You know what you applied in that pot or that patch of land, as you grow it. And it's also good it's very therapeutic, to grow things, but of course this might not be a commercial, advice, but that's how I see quality, but yeah, locally grown, apply the science, and use the extension services that are provided by input, companies as widely as possible. It might be read as, they want to sell me more stuff, but try and get what you can get out of them and apply it, to the best that you can. Thank you.
No problem. So we will talk a lot about policy in the next segment, and I love data, and the running joke is I have a chart for that because I love charts. I like pictures, especially with lots of colors. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But for this part of the section, I always like to give everyone the last word. So closing remarks, starting with Murray and coming back down.
I'm definitely excited with what has happened. I mean, like I say, it's COVID, food shortages was not good. The Ukraine conflict, again, not good. But there's some good that's come out of it. It's having everybody look at stuff differently, looking at different sources. We ourselves are seeing 2 and 3 different groups, whether they're university graduates or people who've been doing stuff for a while that have maybe trying to get a foothold, that now people are looking at what's happening. And I'm going to say you're going to see more eco-friendly fertilizers or plant nutrients or soil amendment products, and how people are looking at the soil. I think we're going to see that really be the ramp up. That's going to be the acceleration. And I think it was going to happen. It always happens over time. It evolves. But I think some of the, the problems or the conflicts out there are definitely going to accelerate agriculture, eco-friendly agriculture, safe agriculture, and food supply. I think we're going to see some tough times, but I definitely think we're going to accelerate positive change.
Yeah, I can see we've got a lot to do over the next 26 years as we get towards 2050, as we go through this transition, and a lot of the things that have been coming in have been older ideas. If we take even those that look new, if we take solar panels, for example, the first ones were developed in 1880. Electric vehicles, the same. The first ones in the 1880s. The hydrogen vehicles that are now being talked about, that's 1806. So very, very early on. And we're now exploring these more sustainable technologies and finding the ones that are going to work, the ones that are going to be good. We've got 25 years to go through this, and this transition is going to be interesting to see how lives change. But I think in agriculture, it is a particular challenge because alongside this, we've got population growth. And you mentioned it earlier, but it's like a 30% growth in population. That's a huge amount of agricultural output that needs to grow alongside a transition to different conditions. I look forward to doing the research and doing the support alongside this.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I also share the same sentiment. A very exciting future ahead of us. Definitely, the agribusiness sector will remain, the cornerstone of that development that we're chasing after. And I think with more and more disciplines in science and engineering, space technology, refocusing in how they can address some of the environmental challenges, we are destined for the next biggest thing in terms of breakthroughs in agriculture. It either be how we feed our crops or how we work the land. We've seen now the tunnel farming becoming a prominent thing in different parts of the world. So we welcome those disciplines in science that are coming back now into agriculture. Personally, I also believe that the age-old traditional systems in different regions of the world are going to become more paramount all over again, in terms of maintaining a balance of environment, local needs, cultural community, subjects, that have remained, part of such systems. So yeah, it will be exciting times ahead. Thanks.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. It was an absolute pleasure. So in the next segment, we're going to talk a bit more intimately with Murray and some of the things that we're doing on the base side, especially when we look at micronized elemental sulfur.